if you can understand that this idea of peer comparison, it is going to be ever present. And it's not so much that the environment or the people around you need to change. What needs to flip is the script in your mind in terms of the mentality you have when looking to the people in your life.
Welcome to the Personal Finance for PhDs podcast, a higher education in personal finance. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Roberts. This is Season 7, Episode 12, and today my guest is Dr. Joy Leary, a licensed clinical psychologist and behavioral finance consultant. Our topic is the danger of keeping up with the Joneses. Joy explains how emotionally unsatisfying and financially damaging trying to keep up with the Joneses is, and that contentment can only come from within yourself. PhDs anticipating future income jumps would do well to put off lifestyle inflation for at least a few years after their salaries increase, which will give them more career and lifestyle choices in the future. This interview really hit home for me as I reflected on my post-PhD life in finances and where my family is headed next. As you might have garnered from listening to previous episodes of this podcast, I had a pretty good handle on my finances by the end of grad school, and I was truly satisfied with my lifestyle. I had defeated my Joneses, or so I thought. Then, my husband and I moved to Seattle. We rented a relatively inexpensive apartment in a wealthy neighborhood. There's a lot of tech money in Seattle, as I'm sure you know. Suddenly, I wasn't comparing my lifestyle to that of other graduate students in a medium cost of living city, but to other full-fledged adults in a high cost of living city. I distinctly remember my first and hardest hitting Jones moment in Seattle. Shortly after we had our first child, I joined a mother's support group in my neighborhood. Our first meeting was in the home of our group leader, and each participant would rotate hosting subsequent meetings. I remember walking into our group leader's house, which was gigantic, gorgeous, and immaculate. It was somewhat shocking to me. Plus, during the meeting, our group leader casually mentioned she was in the process of custom building another house in our neighborhood to move to the next year. My heart sank, knowing that I would eventually host these mothers and babies in my small, dingy, undecorated apartment. That cheap apartment had been a strategic financial choice upon our move. We were following the advice to live like a grad student so that we could keep our retirement savings rate high while I got my business off the ground and we adjusted to parenthood. Even though we had good reasons for living in that apartment, those reasons paled for me when I saw where and how my group leader lived, and I started questioning all our choices. That was my first big post-PhD Jones moment. I got past that feeling, kind of, eventually, for that situation. But now my husband and I are in the early stages of searching for our very first home to purchase, and I can sense myself starting to become aware again of the Joneses. Since buying a house in Southern California is such a big, expensive decision, I know I have to be really conscious about those feelings and influences. That's why the subject of this interview was so timely for me. I hope it will be for you as well. Without further ado, here's my interview with Dr. Joy Leary. I am just delighted to have joining me on the podcast today, Dr. Joy Leary. She is a licensed clinical psychologist and behavioral finance consultant. Such an interesting combination, so I'm really happy to have her on the podcast today. We're actually going to be talking about keeping up with the Joneses, or rather, how not to keep up with the Joneses. So Joy, will you please introduce yourself a little bit further?
Absolutely. It is a joy and a privilege to be here with you today. My name is Joy Leary. I am a licensed clinical psychologist and behavioral finance consultant. So essentially, I am someone who, as a clinician, works where Freud meets finance. So I live and work outside of Napa, California, and I have a telemedicine practice where I see patients for psychotherapy, and I also work in specializing in consultation within the finance industry. So within that role, I'm providing support, training, education, coaching and psychotherapy, also to financial planners and financial advisors, because there's a lot of really exciting things happening within the industry where there's more and more attention being given to the fact that people's relationship with their money is not just a matter of math or economic theory. Money itself is emotional currency. So having an understanding of human psychology and how that drives financial decisions is really starting to be integrated more and more into the world of finance.
Yes, thank you so much for that description. Yes, of course, I have observed this trend as well, and I'm really excited to have you on. I did an interview some time ago with Dr. Daniel Crosby, so we'll link that from the show notes as well, since that was on a similar topic.
He is a good friend and he's a fabulous. So,
oh yeah, it was a wonderful conversation. Would you also tell us a little bit more about your education, because you've spent some time in academia as well?
Yes. So I obtained my master's degree while living abroad in the UK for a couple of years. And I decided after that experience and after starting my clinical work in England that I wasn't quite yet ready to be done with school. So my husband is in the military. We made our way back across the pond. And then I went to graduate school at George Washington University and obtained my doctorate in clinical psychology while I was there.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, so our topic for today, keeping up with the Joneses, probably a phrase that maybe everyone's heard in the audience, but can you give a little bit more of a fine point on the definition?
Absolutely. So this is a phrase that's popularized in society, and it really speaks to the way that people look around their social spheres and circles and look oftentimes at their peers and kind of benchmark their lives and their decisions to that. So they are seeing something, often an outside image or kind of a curated facade. I think certainly social media makes this even more complicated for people today. And then they think to themselves, well, if they have that or they are making that lifestyle choice, that must mean I can or I should. So then they make decisions based on what they are seeing around them.
Does attempting to keep up with the Joneses actually make anyone happier? We'll address the financial component of that in a moment, but does it do anything for us emotionally or socially to try to keep up with the Joneses?
I think really being in the comparison trap just keeps someone emotionally stuck, because what is not happening when you're telling yourself, I need to be doing that, I need to be getting farther ahead, is you aren't focusing and being centered from a place of being grateful for what you have and really having a sense of contentment. And when you think about someone's financial life, when there's this constant search and drive and need for more and more and more, that can lead to dangerous, destructive places. Being on a hedonic treadmill like that can be exhausting. And the truth is that when a lot of times people think, well, I will eventually catch up. But oftentimes the goalpost just keeps on moving.
I was just going to say that. The phrase is keeping up with the Joneses, right? It's not hanging out with the Joneses and being at the same level as the Joneses. Yeah. It's like it implied in the phrase itself is a continual striving, as you were just saying,
exactly.
Which sounds totally exhausting. I really like that you make the point that we can also move these goalposts on ourselves. Like, yeah, maybe you caught up with, Jones number 1 over here. Well, that just means you're going to switch your attention to Jones number 2 and try keeping up in some other area.
I tell people throughout your life, there will always be Joneses there. You went to graduate school with them. You looked around there and you were like, well, they're doing this. That means naturally that's what I should be doing. They are always going to be in your workplace. They're going to be on whatever street you live. So you move to the bigger house, the newer neighborhood. Well, then there's going to be someone else with some that who ultimately has a little bit more. So if you can understand that this idea of peer comparison, it is going to be ever present. And it's not so much that the environment or the people around you need to change. What needs to flip is the script in your mind in terms of the mentality you have when looking to the people in your life.
Yes, such a wonderful point. You mentioned the term hedonic treadmill a couple minutes ago, and I'm betting not everyone in my audience knows what that is. So can you explain that a little bit further?
This idea that oftentimes we're running a race, we're going after more, something better. There's a desire for enough. And people think they are moving closer to the mark, but really you are just exhausting yourself on a treadmill, and there's never a finish line. So when you are caught in this cycle, you're just going to keep running, and it ultimately is never enough. I encourage people to reflect on this idea of what is enough. Who decides what it is, how much it is? How do you know you have it? Even how someone answers that question is enough a number? Is it a sense of security? Does the outside world get to decide what enough is? Or is that something that you determine for yourself? No, this is good. I can stop, I can breathe, and I don't have to continue to feel the need to be amassing more.
Mm-hmm. I'm currently reading the book Your Money or Your Life for the very first time. This is inside the Personal Finance for PhDs community. We have a book club, so I'm reading it for the book club.
That's fabulous.
Yeah, I'm surprised it took me so long to read it, actually, because of course it's been out for a couple of decades. But anyway, the concept of enough figures very prominently in the argument that the authors are making in that book about having, as you were just saying, determining for yourself. And it's really about self-reflection, and it's not at all about looking around you at what anybody else is doing. What it is to be content, be full in a sense, like in terms of thinking about your appetite. You're full, but you don't want to stuff yourself. You don't want to go beyond this, level of fullness or contentness or enoughness, because it's damaging not only to your finances, but also to you as a person to, as you were just saying, continually strive to go beyond, beyond, beyond. One aspect of the hedonic treadmill idea that I understand at any rate is that it's a little bit similar to like addiction or like getting into that, but what you need to feel a pleasure hit from spending becomes higher and higher and higher, because you become adapted at every new spending level. You get to a new spending level and you're like, well, this is fantastic. I have all these new experiences and stuff. It's wonderful. And then suddenly it's just normal and it's just you again. It's just you and yourself. And then you have to go to a higher spending level to get that hit again. And that's the sort of a mountain climbing, like that's kind of the treadmill like aspect of it. Is that correct?
Yes.
So we were just talking about how it's not ever going to be emotionally satisfying. What happens to your finances if you are striving to keep up with the Joneses?
I think peer comparison when it comes to finances is so complex. And oftentimes it is very problematic because peers give you permission to sometimes spend in ways that you ultimately can't afford. And sometimes there's pressure or there's fear of missing out. Now, when we look at this idea and this concept of keeping up with the Joneses, when we look at the financial state of affairs of the average American family who is indebted, over-leveraged, all of these things, if you are then trying to keep up with someone who is overextending, you are then overextending yourself even more. So it just perpetuates this problem indefinitely. My great-grandmother, who lived through the Depression, had this phrase that I love. And I never met her, but it was something that was instilled in my mom. And it was this: just because they have it does not mean they can afford it. And that is something that so many people confuse. They look at, well, this is the house they are living in. This is the car they are driving. These are the vacations they are taking. And so that must mean like that's okay. What they don't see is what goes on behind closed doors. They don't see the physical, the psychological cost of the stress that comes with carrying debt. They don't see the impact of the work stress of the employment situation that person feels like they are trapped in because of the lifestyle that they are living. A lot of that stuff happens behind closed doors, but I tell people, so part of my job as a therapist is I love my job. It so often I wake up and I'm like, I truly believe I have the best job in the world because I get to sit behind closed doors with incredibly bright, driven people who are having conversations they aren't having with anyone else in their lives. So I've sat behind closed doors with the Joneses, and let me tell you, their lives are not as rich or pretty or neat as most people think when you just see a public-facing persona.
Yes. That's a wonderful phrase from your great grandmother, and it reminded me of something that my pastor from my church in North Carolina. I was preaching a sermon one time and was talking about this concept of keeping up with the Joneses, and I remember him saying, if you're going to follow sort of the Christian way of handling money, there's certain things in the Bible that lay out how you're supposed to do this. He says you're going to be living multiple steps behind who you perceive to be as your peers. You're going to be living a step behind because you're not going to be leveraged with debt, at least outside of your mortgage or whatever. You are going to be living a step behind because you're going to be giving. You're going to be living a step behind because you're going to be saving for your future as well. So he was like, you're going to be living 3 steps behind, who you perceive to be your peers in terms of like your career or whatever it is. And that has really stuck with me too, that like, yes, it just as you were saying, you don't know how other people are handling their, as an outsider, you don't know what's going on inside their homes and how they're really managing to live the lifestyle that you can perceive. And, you brought up social media earlier, like we have so many more, I think, potential Joneses in our life right now because we have access in a way, limited access to a lot more people from maybe a lot of our different stages of life and even people we don't know. I'm sure that just exacerbates this entire problem.
Yes. And I love what you brought up. You brought up something so important about lifestyle choices. If you do the things that most people do, you are going to get the things that most people get. You are going to get average. And right now, financially average in our country is not a pretty picture. So it really requires people to step back and ask, okay, what do I really want? And what do I want long term? In order to get ahead, you have, especially early on, our little choices compound over time. So I will often explain to clients and people, if you can make, and this is especially applicable to students, to professionals, a lot of times if you are entering a kind of employment or you're graduating, you're like, okay, I'm going to start living the doctor life. No, hold on. If you can give it a couple of years of living like you are a broke grad student and what you can do with the savings during that time when a lot of your peers are starting to make very different choices, what that can lead to for you in the long term is huge. But that requires being able to say no. It requires being able to tolerate, okay, maybe you're going to miss out on some things. But if you can be willing to do things differently than other people, you give yourself a chance at having something bigger and better that most people will never achieve.
Emily here for a brief interlude. If you are a fan of this podcast, I invite you to check out the Personal Finance for PhDs community at pfforphds.community. The community is for PhDs and people pursuing PhDs who want to take charge of their personal finances by opening and funding an IRA, starting to budget, aggressively paying off debt, financially navigating a life or career transition, maximizing the income from a side hustle, preparing an accurate tax return, and much more. Inside the community, you'll have access to a library of financial education products which I add to every month. There is also a discussion forum, monthly live calls with me, a book club, and progress journaling for financial goals. Basically, the community exists to help you reach your financial goals, whatever they are. Go to pfforphds.community to find out more. I can't wait to help propel you to financial success. Now back to the interview. I'm really glad that you took the conversation this direction, because it's exactly where I wanted to go as well. Talking about, when you have these large income jumps, okay, for PhDs, you finish graduate school, maybe you're moving up to a postdoc. Hopefully a decent jump in income there. Okay, you're moving out of the postdoc or directly out of the PhD, you're getting into a proper job. Hopefully a big jump there.
Yes.
And maybe, throughout your career, potentially there could be other big jumps as you switch, employers or whatnot. So a lot of my audience is still in graduate school or is still in training. And so they're still anticipating and looking forward to those large income jumps in the future. And of course, the advice you just brought up, there's versions of it, live like a grad student, live like a college student, live like a resident. It's basically just keep that lifestyle, or as close to that lifestyle as you can from your prior earning stage for at least a little while into that next one. And then, as you said, this can do fabulous to your finances. So can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Absolutely. And I want to explain, I think something that people often don't fully understand or account for is in school, or maybe early in your career, you have a picture of, this is what I'm going to want. I'm on this linear trajectory professionally. But things change. Life circumstances change. Sometimes your dreams, your desires, opportunities can lead to different places. And if you have made financial choices so that you have the freedom and flexibility to change your mind if you want to at a later time, and not be locked in because of the debt you have and the lifestyle that you have settled into, that gives you a ton of freedom. So I just really emphasize to students the things you are doing with your money now and in these first years of your career are huge. So if you can just hold on and be a little bit more conservative in some areas, that can have huge implications for your financial life later on.
Yeah, I actually want to give an example from my own life here, and it a little feels like I'm tooting my own horn, but I think it does illustrate what you were just talking about. So when my husband and I were in graduate school, we did our PhDs at the same time, so we were both on stipends, same time. We saved, I'm into personal finance, right? So I was figuring this stuff out early. I was figuring out saving, investing, and paying off debt and doing all these things. And so I started that during graduate school. Whereas a lot of people either one, have no opportunity to start saving or investing during graduate school. It's just completely off the table based on either they're going into debt for their degrees or they're just simply not paid even a living wage. That was not our case. We were very fortunate. So we were doing that saving. One could, but two, we took the initiative to do it. We were figuring that out at that time. By the time we finished graduate school, we had amassed quite a decent nest egg. And, one attitude could have been during that time, well, I may as well just spend what I have. I don't really need to save right now because I'm going to have this big income jump in the future. And, it's going to take care of itself at that time. I won't worry about investing until, later on. But because we took that other route of starting as early as we could with, saving and investing and so forth, we had a decent nest egg built up by the time we finished graduate school. That enabled, one, my husband to take a job at a startup, which he had never anticipated doing and was completely, really nervous about that. We're sort of, conservative with our careers. And so so we were like, wow, this job could go away at any point, but it was just such a perfect fit for him. We were like, how can he pass this up? We'll take the risk. We have the nest egg. We can do that. We can take that risk of him taking that kind of job. Secondarily, I was able to start my business, which meant, just completely going off a different track from, the normal job thing, which is a fantastic opportunity. And similarly, a very good fit for me. So I feel like our life, career satisfaction levels were much higher than they would have been had we not been in a financial position at that time to be able to make that choice. And the reason we were in that position was because years earlier we had started this process not really knowing that was how it's going to work out. We didn't realize, these opportunities came our way and we could take advantage of them because of the preparation we'd done before that point.
Absolutely.
So I'm thinking about a graduate student, probably, maybe a postdoc, who is currently maybe even practicing not keeping up with the Joneses because they probably have a lot of Joneses in their lives that they couldn't possibly keep up with, right? Like It's just not even a feasible thing for them to do right now. So what would you say to that person about how to still cultivate contentment in their life when they know they can't even possibly play the game with the Joneses right now, and also how to maintain that once maybe they are able to get in the game once their income is higher?
I think this idea of game, and even if we bring it back to the race, if you can understand everyone is playing a different game, and if you can focus on running your own race and just stay in your lane, that is going to set you up for success. Now, I don't think that if you are not trying to keep up and you're making a concerted effort around that, that doesn't mean your life needs to be devoid of fun and human connection. I encourage people to be creative. You can be the one driving the conversation, making suggestions. And the truth is, sometimes if you are maybe doing things or suggesting things to your social circle that are not going to be exorbitantly costly, there are probably going to be some people who are really relieved. Because here's the thing, everyone's running this race, and some people are more aware of it than others. Some people, based on their upbringing and what they bring to the table in terms of their own money scripts and what gets activated for them around money, they may have different thoughts and feelings about it. But that's one way to think about it. And, this transition, when you do have more income, I think it's important that it doesn't become, if you think about someone who's been on a diet and then it's like everything is suddenly available, I'm just going to binge. If you can keep a mentality of moderation, that is going to serve you going forward.
I love those two suggestions, and especially the first one around, like, it's sort of like money decisions, let's say about social spending with your peer group, they don't have to happen to you, right?
No.
Like, you can actually sort of take the wheel and say, at least some of the time, I'm going to be suggesting things to do that are within my budget. Like you said, probably some other people will be relieved. And so, you can do a combination of planning things and maybe saying yes or no here or there to things that other people suggest, so that you're not, always saying no to everything. But yeah, you can keep it more within your range, and steer things. I know certainly for me in graduate school, I found a group of friends that I was comfortable socializing with, and we all sort of had the same manner of socializing that we enjoyed, and it was very inexpensive, and it was really good for all of us in that sense. And so it's just, you sort of find your people is maybe one way. So like there aren't so many Joneses so close to you in your life. I had a couple other ideas about how to like combat this, impulse to keep up with the Joneses. One was to redefine what you're jonesing for. So like instead of jonesing for the consumption aspects of like using your money, Jones for like, I'm going to max out that 401k. Like I'm going to, be striving, if you want to strive for something, be striving for something that's ultimately going to benefit your finances instead of, working the opposite direction for you.
Change your status symbols.
Yes. Oh, that's a great way of putting it. I love that. It's very, it's millionaire next door, right? So try to be like that person. Are there any other like sort of behavioral finance tips that you would suggest for, helping people achieve, their financial goals without letting this, these Jones impulses kind of get in their way?
Well, I think just really paying attention to what you are benchmarking to, this idea of this is the baseline. I think that's really important. As you think about and reflect on, I think developing financial self awareness and doing some reflection and understanding about what gets activated for you with your money, and really starting to dig into some of the more core beliefs you carry about money and how that drives what you do with it. I think those are really important foundational places for people to start.
Yeah, I think going along with those exercises as well, and you just mentioned this, is sort of remembering where you've come from, like remembering the influences, of course, that your parents have, and then maybe your peers at, through different stages of your life. And remembering, like, especially once you've moved past like the graduate school stage, like, okay, back then I did live on this amount of
Yes.
money. I did have this size of home. I did do these things. Was I happy then? Was I content then?
Yeah.
Why are things different now? Could they be more
Exactly.
similar to how
Yeah.
things were in the past? I'm asking myself some of these questions now that
Yeah.
I'm, a few years out of graduate school.
If you are telling yourself, I will be happy when, and you are then looking to something in the future, I would really encourage you to go back into your history and think about this idea of happy. What is some other evidence you have that there have been other times when you've had that feeling, that experience, that you haven't had that thing? So happiness is not contingent on that which you are chasing.
Yeah, that's such a, I think, foundational point about happiness that I'm only just sort of starting to learn
Yeah.
myself now in my 30s. And I wish I had known it, because I am the type of person who kind of always has goals and is always striving for something. And my husband definitely kind of complains and kind of ribs me for like always wanting the next thing, and why can't you be satisfied now? And I am starting to realize like that, ooh, that's just how I am. I need
Yeah.
to really like look at that, because I'm never going to get there, right? If that's what I'm basing that on. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Joy, before we wrap up the interview here?
Well, I think this idea of there's a lot of power in saying no and having financial boundaries. That's something I do a lot of talking with people about. I think a lot of things get in the way of people saying no. There's a fear of missing out, there's a discomfort with what you're anticipating someone else's reaction is going to be. And the truth is, I believe people would be healthier, wealthier, and less exhausted overall if they built that muscle of saying no more often. And again, that's not saying no to everything. But if you are finding yourself in a situation in your gut where you're like, I'm going to say yes, but I really don't want to do this, ask yourself why. And then what is getting in the way of your taking care of yourself, if it's your energy, if it's your finances, and what would need to happen in order for you to have the courage to say no? And what is the cost to your yes? Be
Mm-hmm.
that financial, physical, psychological.
Yeah, thank you so much. How can people find out more about the work that you do? Or I don't know if they want to be a client of yours, like how do people connect with you?
So my website is my name, JoyLeary, joyleary.com. I am active on LinkedIn, Joy Leary PsyD, and also spin my creative wheels on Instagram a little bit, Joy Leary PsyD, and also love to hang out on Twitter and connect with people there. Also, my handle is Joy Leary PsyD.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's where we connected as well. So, final question here, Joy. What is your best financial advice for an early career PhD? It could be something we've touched on in this interview, or it could be something else entirely.
My best advice is to do things different. than most people around you. If you do that now, you will have things that no one else later on in their career will likely be able to accomplish and achieve.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for this interview and for joining me today.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. Thanks for sharing your platform with me.
Listeners, thank you for joining me for this episode. pfforphds.com/podcast is the hub for the Personal Finance for PhDs podcast. There you can find links to all the episode show notes and a form to volunteer to be interviewed. I'd love for you to check it out and get more involved. If you've been enjoying the podcast, please consider joining my mailing list for my behind-the-scenes commentary about each episode. Register at pfforphds.com/subscribe. See you in the next episode, and remember, you don't have to have a PhD to succeed with personal finance, but it helps. The music is Stages of Awakening by Poddington Bear from the Free Music Archive and is shared under CC by NC. Podcast editing and show notes creation by Miriam Ock.